Let's start with just a basic introduction about yourself. Can you share your name, where you're at school, your major, some background info?
Yeah, so I'm Famesh Patel. I'm a senior at the University of Arizona, and I'm studying neuroscience and cognitive science. I'm currently the president of the Neurosci Alpha chapter at U of A. And I kind of joined Neurosci because it was it's an honorary and it brings a lot of a lot of connections through during the major, during undergrad, but also like post grad as well, and in terms of career opportunities and connecting with industry professionals, doctors, a lot of things, and it kind of pushed me into the direction of wanting to pursue like an MD, PhD as well, and being able to do that. And so that's one of the reasons I kind of joined Neurosci. Um, and I guess another thing about me is that my research that I'm currently involved in is Parkinson's research in zebra finches, which is a type of bird, and trying to see if we can detect it a little bit earlier. Um, but yeah.
Cool. So just to start at the very beginning here, you're at University of Arizona. Are you like from Arizona originally, or how did you end up at that particular school?
Yeah, if we're going like all the way back, I was born in India and then my parents moved to like New Jersey. We moved to Wisconsin, Minnesota. So I've been a lot of places.
Mhm.
But then we came to Arizona when I was in fifth grade. So I've been here for a while. And so I used to live in Peoria, Arizona, which is like kind of Phoenix, Arizona, for people who don't know
Mhm.
Arizona. And Tucson is basically south 2.5 hours. And so when I was applying to college, I applied to, ASU, U of A. And U of A was just better because they had the neuroscience and cognitive science major, and it was much more interesting and much more thorough because not a lot of universities have the neuroscience and the cognitive science major. And so,
Yeah.
that's kind of why I decided to come here and study both of those fields together and really see the broader impact of neuroscience. And it's been a great experience so far.
Awesome. And you mentioned that you're planning on doing an MD, PhD, or are you still in the application phase, or are you already like locked in out of school?
No, no, no. I'm still still applying right now. I've done like sending in physical applications. I have a couple interviews. I actually have an interview in like 3 days. So
Oh,
I'm waiting to hear
congratulations.
from
Good
that
luck.
place. Yeah, thank you, thank you. But we're hoping, fingers crossed. Hopefully I get a decision soon. But yeah.
Yeah. And what kind of guided your search? Are you still looking like in the area that you're currently in, or like geographically speaking, or what has kind of been guiding your search for schools, whether that be like specific PIs at the school that you're interested in, like location, program
Yeah.
specific things?
Yeah, I think two big things for me, or three things I guess for me are like geographical location is number one, 100%. Then two, it's like the research they have at the institution. And then three is like student life and how supportive administration is for students because an MD PhD is 8 years long.
Mhm.
Do you know how MD PhDs work or no? I can totally explain it if not.
Oh yeah, if you want to just explain it, like for people who might be listening, I know a lot of our listeners are kind of into research, but not necessarily into medicine as well. So if you want to like explain how that works, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So an MD PhD, like the way it works is you do 2 years of your MD because the first 2 years of med school are kind of like just studying in the textbooks all the time. And so you do the first 2 years and then you leave med school, do 4 years for your PhD. And once that's done, you come back and do the last 2 years of medical school, which are essentially just like rotations and looking at procedures and following doctors around. And so overall, it's 8 years long, which is a really long time. And so those were kind of important things to me, kind of going back to like geographical location, trying to understand like I'm gonna be here for 8 years. I don't want to, be unhappy here. I really want to I want to go to a place where it's like really green. I want to go outside to parks, see nature. I want like
Awesome.
4 seasons. And for people who don't know Arizona, that's very the opposite of Arizona. Arizona is very brown. It's very hot here all the time, which is really nice. Like really nice to have sun like 365 days of the year, but sometimes it does get annoying. Like during the summer when it's 110 degrees.
Wow.
Um,
That's
Yeah, it
burnout.
gets bad. Yeah. But, it's nice to have that aspect to apply to schools where that's not really the case. So I applied a lot East Coast, West Coast, like Chicago, which is not really East Coast, but kind of the same vibe.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
went
then
to
in terms of,
undergrad in Chicago. There's definitely a more East Coast big city vibe compared to like I'm currently in St. Louis, which is
oh, no way.
right in the middle of everything, but very different Midwestern energy out here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that's why like since I went to Chicago for SFN, I really fell in love with it too. I was like, this is a really nice
Mhm.
city. It's really, it's like New York, but so much cleaner too. And so, that was a thing I thought about. But yeah,
Yeah.
and then looking into research too, like specific type of research, I want to do neurodegenerative sort of interventions or, like personalized medicine type of initiatives for my research. And so I tried to look into institutions that had that. Because one thing my PI did tell me was like, if you go to any institution that like cares about neuroscience research, like you will find something you're interested in. Like focus more about like, will you be really happy at the institution more broadly? And
Mhm.
so, I looked broadly at what research was there, if it like was in my interest. And for MD, PhD, like applications, you do have to be like, hey, this is a PI I want to work with. Hey, I want to work on this research. So you already know that a school is for you or not when you're writing your essays. And then also on top of that, I think another big thing that I looked at was like student life. Like, is the stipend that they give you like actually livable in that city?
Mhm.
Is the administration, do they listen to students when they make decisions and do they change decisions based on student input? Are students happy there? And all the programs I've applied to and I've talked to students there, they all seem really happy at the program. And so I'm really happy with the decisions I made based on like those three major aspects.
Awesome. And when you are kind of doing that research into what student life is like, I know most people don't really get an opportunity to hear from students until they're in, the interview phase or they're doing their visit. What did you do, like either while you were applying, before you applied, or during that interview phase to kind of really dig into how actual students were doing? Like, were you talking to like postdocs, PhD students, or like what kind of conversations did you have?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that so I did like pre-interview and during the interview as well. But pre-interview, some of the big things I did was like look on LinkedIn for people that like might be going to the school that I'm interested in and reaching out to them through email, through LinkedIn, being like, hey, I'm a current applicant to your school. Would you be willing to answer some questions? And
Mhm.
99% of the time, like students are very willing to help you and answer your questions and be very truthful with you because they're already in. It doesn't really matter to them if, they tell you that it's a bad school or not. And they're very, very truthful. And it's been really nice. And even like expanding on my network and connections through friends at U of A who've gone to other grad schools, like asking them, hey, do you know anyone? Has been
Mhm.
really helpful because like one school I applied to was Rutgers, and I had a family friend who is currently at Rutgers, who's a dental student. But I was like, hey, do you know any MD, PhD, or even MD students at Rutgers? He's like, oh yeah, definitely. I'll give you some contact info. And so like the next day, he gave me like three phone numbers of people that he had reached out to just to talk to me. And so,
Mhm.
being able to use that network to connect with students, I think is really important pre-interview. But during the interview for MD, PhD, they really connect you with a lot of like student ambassadors and current students and really try to get you involved in the interview. Like the interview that I have in a couple of days is like 3 days long. It's like from 8 a.m. all the way to 5 p.m. every single day.
Well,
And
so are
like
you going to be like shadowing in the lab, or what is that structure like?
no, since like post-COVID, a lot of the interviews have been on Zoom. So it's a lot of like you interview with the entire admissions committee and then you have to interview with like students and then like during that time you get a break where you get to talk with students only. Like there's no admin or anything in those Zoom rooms when you're talking to students. And students have no impact on if you get into MD PhD programs. So like you can ask them anything, be like, "Hey, do you think the school really listens to you? I've heard this on the internet about this school. What are your thoughts?" And this and that. And from what I've seen, like again, a lot of students are very truthful about situations. Like if you tell them like, hey, is administration really listening to you? I've heard students go like, oh yeah, no, they don't listen, or they do listen, or there's this issue. And so really talk to the students and try to leverage that relationship and every like interaction that you have with students both before your interview and even after, I think was a really big thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Just really knowing what you're getting into is so important when you're making such a long-term commitment to like 8 years is a
Yeah.
very long time to be in a situation that isn't serving you. So sounds like you're doing all the right things. Um, and so could you talk a little more about your research? Like I know you've started doing research in high school. You started with like computational neuro, moving into more like clinical research now. What did that path look like for you? And how did you identify opportunities or like find things that you were really interested in to research?
Yeah, so like really like for research when I came into college, I was very much like, oh, it's wearing a white coat, microscopes, pipettes, that sort of thing. But over time, I would really quickly realize that that's not what research really is. It's a wide spectrum of things. Like I've been involved in, public health research where I've got into the community and talked to the Hispanic community specifically in Tucson about like low vaccine COVID-19 vaccine uptake rates in the community and why it's much lower than other minority groups in Tucson and trying to understand how the healthcare system can reform to kind of impact and increase vaccine uptake in that community. And I've also been able to do research on, as you said, clinical research and being able to understand how stuff goes from, working in the lab to something on the shelf, like let's say Tylenol or some medication or some device in the OR. It's been really interesting to see that connect between, medicine and research and why I really want to do an MD PhD as well. And, you know, over time I've been able to be involved in all these different things, but I think the biggest like research experience that I've had over the last couple of years is my neuroscience research with Dr. Miller, and working on Parkinson's research just because that's something that's been interesting to me because that's why I'm a neuroscience major after all. Being involved in neurodegenerative stuff, trying to understand the secrets of the brain. Like we've been researching the brain for so long, and yet we know so little. Like we don't know how memories are kind of create. Well, we do, but we kind of don't about how like memories are created and like the causes of neurodegenerative disorders. And there's so much yet to be discovered. It's so interesting to me, and I think all my research experiences have given me different things to, work on and kind of make me a proper researcher over the last like couple years. And so it's been a really fun experience to be involved in so many things and yet like hone down onto like neuroscience research as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you obviously studied neuroscience and cognitive science, you're minoring in biochemistry. What for you really drew you towards neuroscience? I feel like it seems like the more people I talk to, the more I hear that, they're really interested in learning how the brain works or like how certain processes happen. For me specifically, like I was really drawn to neuroscience and biochemistry because it really gives you an opportunity to look at problems from like the behavioral level, the physiological level, the cellular and biochemical level, and really kind of dig into things in a very interdisciplinary way. Um, does that resonate with you, or like what really drew you to the path that you're on right now? And especially in the context of doing research into like drug discovery and personalized medicine for age-related diseases, like what for you kind of put you on that path versus other avenues in neuroscience?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one thing I will say, I came into like the U of A kind of undecided, which is totally fine. Like if you come in undecided, but I was like, yeah, that's probably not, a great idea being, at the time like just pre-med. I probably should have had to get a major soon. And I was like, you know what, let's try neuroscience. That sounds cool. I like brain stuff. And, I took like a couple classes here and there, and I was like at the U of A, as I said, like the neuroscience and cognitive science part, and as you said, like interdisciplinary aspect of it too, like being able to learn about like enzymes and tiny molecules and cellular stuff all the way to like psychology and like the bigger picture things and how these small cellular stuff work in the bigger picture has been so amazing where you can see all these different things. And learning over the last couple of years too that you can connect neuroscience with like neuro law and neuroethics and neuroeconomics. Like we had like a student at U of A who was a neuroscience economics double major, and now they work like on Wall Street as a way of being like, hey, like I understand how people like make decisions and behavioral economics, and so that they're using the neuroscience degree to work on Wall Street and like financials and just the broad scope of being a neuroscience major and being able to use that expertise for so many different things is really, really interesting to me. Um, and that's why I've kind of still been a neuroscience major and still be interested in it. And the reason that I want to go more specifically into drug discovery and neurodegenerative disorders is because like for neurodegenerative disorders, one of the big things, the big risk factors is getting old. Like
Mm.
as you get old, you are more risky of getting like neurodegenerative disorders, and everyone ages. Like that's just true. And so like being able to understand those diseases, I think really helps in quality of life and really helps with improving that sort of impact on society. I think research on that right now is one of the biggest fields that we can have an impact on personally, and I would love to, continue to figure out like really why is this happening. I don't know if you saw like a couple years ago like how there was drama in the Alzheimer's field about like this one researcher kind of fabricating their research and like the
I think I saw it was like a big, I think a Nature publication that
yeah
had to get rescinded, right? Like a very
yeah
highly cited paper.
yeah, it was like the paper that like kind of like guided all the research on Alzheimer's for the last like 20, 30 years, and then it was proven false. And so everyone was like, "Oh, so this hypothesis for why Alzheimer's was caused is like not true." And it's kind of crazy like like literally even after all these years still don't know like what really causes Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or a lot of neurodegenerative disorders. And so that like I think the mystery of it really also draws me to it and like trying to find an answer to it.
Yeah, I think that's like it really is a big puzzle, and I kind of love biochemistry for that reason because there's so many interactions that happen like inside the body and even on the genetic level that give rise to specific diseases, but also create like so much variation between how individual people experience those diseases. So it's a really interesting topic. And like you said earlier, like we know so little about the brain despite knowing so much, it seems. And I feel like age and aging is really the next frontier for research. And I'm really excited to see what like all the MDs and MD PhDs are up to. And just researchers as we kind of advance technologies. And I think especially with computational neuroscience starting to become a really big field and just AI accelerating the pace of research rapidly. I feel like a lot of breakthroughs are going to be coming in the next, 10, 20 years even. Um,
Yeah.
so you plan to stick with Parkinson's in your PhD, it sounds like, or are you thinking of branching into other diseases?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to whatever diseases, honestly. Parkinson's obviously would be optimal, but I'm definitely open, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, other neurodegenerative. I'm totally open to other diseases, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you envision yourself, like after you finish your MD, PhD, what is your ideal next step? Like, do you want to go into clinical medicine? Do you want to like go into like biotechnology and go into like industry to be developing therapies? Like, what's your dream?
Yeah, so the dream, right? The best case scenario of what happens essentially for me, I've thought about this a little bit, is so starting off a lot more MD focused and trying to understand what issues really are out there to understand as like a researcher, like working with patients and being like, hey, this is a field or a subfield that's not focused on, and using that to like figure out what my research question should be, setting up my lab, and kind of working like in academic medicine while also collaborating with industry at the same time. Like I would love to teach as a professor while also being able to do research and work with industry and, partners like that and really create like a powerhouse group essentially. I want to go like do research all the way from cells in a lab all the way to clinical research and kind of be like a coherent pipeline of that happening. I know that's very like ambitious, but I was talking to an MD PhD student and they were like, that's a very common like way that a lot of researchers go. Like they do like they collaborate with other labs and kind of make a group, a research group, like a cancer group or whatever, and they do that sort of thing where they do research on cells and they send it to another lab to do it on mice. And then once that's set, they send it to clinical research and try to do it like in different phases. And they all get to like kind of see that process. And that's kind of what I want to do. I want to be able to work on the research process all the way from the beginning to the end. And I think that's kind of like a result of me being involved in all these different research experiences and continuing to want to be involved in these different things. And so that's kind of optimally what I would love to happen. But we'll see what happens. You know, things like priorities change and stuff. So we'll see. But that would be the dream.
Yeah, I mean, I totally resonate with that. Like the lab I'm in now is we work in genetics, but my
Oh.
PI is like very collaborative with all of the other people in our department, which is like so awesome to see how we can go from like basic science wet lab to mouse models to clinical models to, I mean, many people throughout my institution have like started companies or like are on boards for drug companies or biotech companies because they really care about sharing their research and having those like interdisciplinary, inter-industry collaborations. And I think I think that being an MD, PhD gives you kind of a really great insight into what research needs to be done and also arms you to like actually do that in a way that makes it super applicable to clinical medicine. Um, it's like a very cool pathway, and I'm really excited to see like what you get into. So do you, I guess if you weren't going to be in academic medicine, like if you could see yourself like going into industry instead or something that isn't this, ideal that you have in your mind right now, like what would you want to do if you weren't doing that? If you,
I would, as you said, like going into industry, I think, you know, obviously that's the next thing after academia and kind of being involved, I think in industry, having the ability to be more directly involved in the research rather than like grant writing as you would in academia, I think is a really big aspect of it. And being involved in the research is a big thing that I would want to do and be directly in the lab working on experiments. And maybe even kind of migrating to consultancy work. Because I've heard, you know, like MD PhDs are able to be very good consultants, like for biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies and that sort of thing. And I would love to kind of go down that path as well and serve in that role because I think through that you can have such a large impact too, is because these companies have such a large impact with their medication and their devices and whatnot. I think that would be a really cool avenue to go through and maybe something even that's like like really separate from medicine, right? Like instead of or research, like instead of doing pipettes and putting on the white coat and treating patients and stuff, like consultancy is kind of out there to the point where it's, you know, it's separated from like research and medicine and science, but still being able to be using my like knowledge to help people and still make an impact through these companies, I think would be really great to kind of do that sort of stuff, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, even though you're not directly treating patients or doing like hands-on research, I feel like scientific communication is such an important skill, and there tends to be a bit of a disconnect sometimes between people who are super knowledgeable in the technical aspects of their subject and people who can effectively communicate that to a general audience. So there's definitely a need there. Um, and they definitely require like research and business or consulting are completely different skill sets as well. Which I mean, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about all of the different fields that are emerging in neuroscience, I just think it's really interesting that at this point in time, we're seeing like the rise of neuroethics and neuro law and like more people going into like neuroscience in business fields because in my mind, I'm like, so many of these principles are so applicable to driving like consumer behavior or understanding how people operate like at a societal level or like in the context of like the justice system or in, writing contracts, being ethical in decision making throughout industries is something that is kind of well studied, but not very well integrated with what we know about, neuroscience at the like cellular, biological, very like basic science level. So yeah, I think it's super cool to see a lot more people who are in medicine going into consultancy for the purpose of making it more evidence-based and sort of aligned with what is actually happening at the research and academic level. Um,
Yeah, and then like going off that, like one of the big things for me for like being an MD PhD is being an advocate, and I think like also one way to do that is through like consultancy, but also like public policy is like
mm,
a thing I would love to go into because my PI, Dr. Miller, she worked on Capitol Hill, kind of educating Congress like people on like policies and scientific policies and how that would work, and that's something that if it does like none of this other stuff works out, I would love to go into that as well, just because as you said, like being able to use science to, understand ethical behaviors and consumer behaviors and all these different things and really seeing the impact of neuroscience in interdisciplinary fields, I think is really important. And that's another way I would love to like be involved in that if possible.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and I mean, I have so many questions I want to ask, but I want to cover some of the ones I have written down. So if we can transition back towards like your research life, what you do on a day-to-day basis, um, what does a typical day or week look like in the lab for you? Can you kind of talk through like what you're doing at the bench, what you're doing in your admin time, how you structure your like communication with your PI or like other collaborators around you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one of the big things for my lab is just we do it when we're able to do it, like these experiments and stuff. It's 2-day experiments to do like immunohistochemistry is kind of what I kind of focused on in my time this last year and a half is immunohistochemistry, taking brain slices, looking at protein aggregation. And those experiments like take like 2 days, and I work with my PhD student to kind of coordinate schedules and see like what works for us, what doesn't work, when are we going to do it? Because we need to like Thursday and Friday or Tuesday and Wednesday. And then, being able to analyze those photos in like a quick turnaround time is like more remote. And that's what I do outside of lab, outside of the bench. And even like working on audio, like analysis of the data as well, trying to look at the connection between protein aggregation and audio of the birds and seeing if there's an issue. Like I have to go in and analyze the audio and analyze the photos and kind of see the connection between the two. And having a quick turnaround time for that is extremely important, especially right now because we're trying to get in a manuscript
Mhm.
soon for the research. And so like communication is like as you said is like extremely important. And so being able to focus on that through, being on top of email. Like we don't have like a central communication dashboard or task or whatever, but we use email and text messaging very thoroughly and like try to be very on top of it. And we also have a document where we fill out like our weekly updates so our PI knows what we're up to and knows that we're doing what we're supposed to. Like since U of A gives credit for research, I have 3 credits, which means, I should be in lab 10 hours or doing lab work 10
Mhm.
hours a week. But I'm doing way more than 10 hours a week.
A
It's closer to
choice or
50.
just because there's so much you need to get done?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like there's so much to get done in so little time.
Mhm.
And so it like pushes towards like the 20-hour kind of limit. But my PI is very understanding. It's like, hey, don't, do this like past like 10 o'clock, go to sleep. Um, but really that's kind of the general gist of what I do in lab because like general day to day is not the same and even week to week is not the same. But that's general like gist and pipeline of what we do when we're doing experiments and stuff.
Absolutely. And I mean, I I feel like this is a silly question to ask in the context of research because like most people doing research love what they're doing and would do it all day if they could, but other things in life also take up time. So how do you kind of balance your time or like really set boundaries about how much effort and time you're willing to spend on projects kind of past that 10-hour maximum when you have other things going on?
Yeah, it's really, I think, an important aspect of like priorities, and it's something I've had to learn the hard way over the last couple of years is like research can't be my only priority because, I'm president of a bunch of clubs on campus. I am, a student. I have a family. I have friends. I have classes to focus on. I can't just be doing research. And it's kind of understanding that, hey, like after like 9 p.m., my brain's not going to work and I'm not going to be able to do this, or I have an exam tomorrow, or, me and my friends decided to hang out like a month ago. I can't just cancel because I have to do research stuff. And so it's a lot of like understanding where my priorities are, understanding that like yes, there's a destination that I have to get to, the final product, but it's really about like enjoying the journey to get there. And I don't want to like burn myself out and really hate the journey getting there because I know like research is long and it takes a while to get a result that you want. And so
Yeah.
like being
And at
able to
the
understand
same
that is
time,
really
I think
crucial.
it's hard to kind of put limits when you know that every moment that you're not doing research is time when you're not contributing or like coming up against a deadline and you're not adding to it. I feel like that creates some tension too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And being able to like work with the team and like work with deadlines that are reasonable and make them understand like you're a student is very helpful. And so yeah, you like put it like hit it in on the head. Sorry, I didn't know what the saying was. Hit it on the head.
Yeah,
But
no, for real. I really came to research after I graduated, and so I did not have a great foundation for setting those boundaries, and that was something that there was a very steep learning curve for. But I think you're doing, a great thing in acknowledging that, you have other things going on in your life, and it's really important to know what works for you and what your time needs to look like in order for you to be your most successful. So I think that that's a really great insight. Um, and I mean, as we kind of close out the interview, do you have any closing thoughts or advice for people who are maybe pursuing an MD, PhD, or even like pursuing any type of grad school in general in terms of like your experience, things that you wish you'd done, things that you would do again?
yeah, no, one thing 100% that I think everyone should remember, and it kind of I just said it was like enjoy the journey, not the destination. And another way I saw this put, like I saw a quote earlier this week where it was like the person who likes to walk is going to walk further than the person who's trying to like win a race. And it's kind of like understanding like if you're just going from one next big accomplishment to the next big accomplishment, there's a lot of like dead space in between that, nothing's happening. And if you're not happy during that time, it's going to be very difficult to go from one big accomplishment to the next. Like if I'm going from like, oh, I presented at SFN to I want to graduate next semester, there's like 6 months like not even like 8 months in between that. Like if I don't have those small achievements or small things that I'm really happy about, it's going to get tiring. And I think that's an important thing with any grad school degree, like MD, PhD, MD, masters, whatever. I think it's so long that you need to like have other things to do and really enjoy the fact that you're doing research or in med school or whatever. And that's one thing that's carried me and I've really learned the hard way is like, hey, like I shouldn't be striving towards, just getting an A in a class, but really enjoying to learn like what I'm learning in biochem or OChem or whatever class. And like that really takes you like the extra mile in being able to survive and not get burnt out, I think.
That is amazing advice. I think that's a great note to end on. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you like coming on here to talk and letting us share this with our viewers.